أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير إنك على كل شيء قدير تولج الليل في النهار وتولج النهار في الليل وتخرج الحي من الميت وتخرج الميت من الحي وترزق من تشاء بغير حساب صدق الله العظيم. We continue with verses number 26 and 27 of Surah Al-Imraan. In the last verses we spoke about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam visiting Baytul Midras and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam inviting the Yahud towards Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala and this deen of Islam and their response to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. According to many narrations, these two verses were revealed on the occasion of the Battle of Khandaq or the Battle of Al-Ahzab, which we generally know as the Battle of the Trench, that had taken place in the life of our Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the 5th year of the Hijrah. The people of Medina, some of the individuals, leaders, had gone to Makkah Mukarramah and they had stirred the leaders of the Quraysh and others around Makkah Mukarramah to launch an attack against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, which then formed a confederation and allied force that marched onto Medina Munawwara. When Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam had heard about this, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. A mashura was made. Sayyiduna Salman al-Farsi radiyallahu ta'ala anhu had given his rai. His mashura was that let's have a trench dug so that between us and them, they will not be able to get access to us, and in this way, this will keep them at bay. So Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam accepted the opinion of Sayyidina Salman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and Sahaba were made into groups, and they had begun this momentous task of digging this trench. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself had participated. He made them in groups of 10, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself participated. Now, as they had dug, a huge rock became a barrier, an impediment which could not be penetrated. Sayyidina Salman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, according to one riwayat, he was the one that was digging, and now he could not penetrate it. Some of his colleagues had told him to go around the rock. Sayyidina Salman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu said, no, this is the line that has been demarcated by Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I will not protrude, I will not move away from the line that Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam had drawn. So he goes to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam takes the pick from the hand of Sayyidina Salman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and he goes down himself. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam strikes the rock the first time, the second time, and the third time. When Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes out, Sayyiduna Salman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu says to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we had seen on the 3 strikes of the rock something that was very peculiar. A light had shone, and that light had shone, according to this narration, between the 2 hillocks of Medina Tayyibah, that in actual fact are the borders of Medina. In other words, the entire Medina was lit up with these lights. The 3 occasions, the 3 strikes, 3 lights, and on all 3 occasions it had lit up the entire Medina. So Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam looked around and he asked the other Sahaba, did you people also notice what Salman is saying? So they all responded in the positive. And then Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained to them that on the strike of the first rock, and the emission of the spark that then sparked off into this light, into this nur, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala had shown me the white palaces of Hira, that is in Persia, of Madain. And then on the strike of the rock the second time, and the second spark that had emitted, and that light that you had seen, in it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had shown me the red palaces of the Romans. And then on the third strike, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had shown me Sana'a, and that is Yemen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had shown me those palaces, and Jibreel alayhi salatu wassalam had informed me that my ummah will then gain power over it, and obviously then the deen of Islam will begin to spread. Now if one looked at the situation at that time in Medina Tayyibah, we have all learned in our madrasa days that at the time of Ahzab, at the time of the Battle of Trench, there was so much of hunger in Medina Munawwara that Sahaba used to tie stones to their bellies. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam had tied 2 stones to his belly. That was the kind of hunger that was prevalent at that time. So when the munafiqeen had heard about this, they began to make a mockery of it, that here you are in such a condition of fear that you are digging this trench, you are in such a condition that you do not even have food, and you have these huge aspirations of conquering these great empires and bringing them down. Is that all possible? Ma wa'adana Allahu wa rasuluhu illa ghurura. Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, wa na'udhu billah, has not promised us but absolute deception. So on this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed these 2 verses. Qul, say O Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Allahumma malikal mulk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Malik. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner of sovereignty. That you Yahud, you people have not yet understood that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has transferred nubuwwat from the Banu Israel to the Banu Ismail. You people have not understood that nubuwwat was in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala had transferred it, and you could do absolutely nothing. But of course, hasrat, regret, remorse, and your hasad, and your enmity that burns your heart. But there is absolutely nothing you can do. That all is in the hands of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So similarly, if Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala now gives over, and Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala hands over these empires to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it is all in the hands of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Tabarakalladhi biyadihil mulk. Blessed be that being in whose hands is all sovereignty, all kingdom, all governance, all is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tu'til mulka man tasha. O Allah, you grant sovereignty to whomsoever you desire. Wa tanzi'ul mulka mimman tasha. And O Allah, you take away, you snatch away sovereignty from whomsoever you desire. All of it, Allah, is in your hands. Never mind today, we are in this condition of abject poverty. There is hunger around us, there is fear, and whatever our cases may be, but all of this is in your hands, and you change those situations. Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam was in the bottom of that well, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had brought him to the throne of Egypt, and from the very same throne of Egypt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken Fir'aun, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had brought him to the bottom of those waters. That is all in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَتُعِزُّ مَن تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَن تَشَاءُ. That outwardly it may seem today, on the day of Khandak, on the day of Trench, that there is humiliation, there is disgrace, but the truth and the reality is, O Allah, you grant izzat, O Allah, you grant honor to whomsoever you desire. وَتُذِلُّ مَن تَشَاءُ. And O Allah, you grant disgrace to whomsoever you desire. Allah, that is all in your hands. بِيَدِكَ الْخَيْرِ. In your hands is good. Now here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His hands is all good. in the hands of Allah Ta'ala is all bad. Whatever conditions come upon us, all of it is in the hands of Allah Ta'ala, whether those conditions are conducive to us, whether they are abject to us, whether we can cope with those conditions. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used only the one term, biyadikal khair, the one aspect of it, that in your hands is only good. Whatever difficulties we go through in this world, that sometimes it may be averse to us, but in it also there is good. And to understand it, sometimes a person has an illness, an ailment, and a person needs to go through an operation. So that operation, at the end of it all, it is good for us that whatever is in it, whatever is in our bodies needed to be removed. There may be some abscess, so we have to go through that pain. So that pain for a few moments, a few days may seem to be bad, but ultimately it is good. So to us it may seem to be evil and bad, but in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever Allah ta'ala does for us, that is good. Innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. And O Allah, you have power over all things. Tulijul layla fin nahar wa tulijul nahara fil layl. Allah, you are that being that causes the night to enter into the day and the day to enter into the night, which means that on the one hand we find the alternation of the day and the night into the day. Then we find the expansion and the extension of the night. Sometimes the nights become longer, the days become shorter, and then the opposite, the days become longer and the nights become shorter. All of that is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All man can do is man can just change the clock, add an hour, 1 hour behind, 1 hour ahead. That is all we can do. We cannot change all those conditions. All of it is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَتُخْرِجُ الْحَيَّ مِنَ الْمَيِّتِ وَتُخْرِجُ الْمَيِّتَ مِنَ الْحَيِّ. And Allah, you are that being that you extract and you take out a living thing from something that is dead. Now when we look at an egg, that it will seem to be absolutely dead. And from there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes out a little chick. Allah ta'ala takes out a little nestling. That is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the opposite also, that an egg, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes out from a hen. That is also all in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sayyiduna Hasan al-Basri rahimahumullah used to say that we have seen the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that from a person that had enmity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken out a person of proper iman. Look at Sayyiduna Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam. From Azar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam. And then the opposite is also true, that from Hazrat Nuh alayhi salatu wassalam, Allah ta'ala had brought one of his offspring that was an enemy to Nuh alayhi salatu wassalam. That is all in the hands of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. How they would be, that is all in Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala's hands. That is not in the parents' hands. That is neither in the son's hands. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala does as Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala so desires. وَتَرْزُقُ مَنْ تَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. And O Allah, you are that being that sustains whomsoever you desire, بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ, without any measure. Like Allah Ta'ala says, Allahu يَبْسُطُ الرِّزْقَ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَقْدِرُ. Allah Ta'ala expands sustenance for whomsoever Allah Ta'ala so desires, وَيَقْدِرُ, and Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala constrains for whomsoever Allah Ta'ala desires. That is all the priority of Allah Ta'ala. May Allah Ta'ala give us the tawfiq. Inshallah we'll continue. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.